Hey everybody, it's your life science / biology teacher, Mr. Poser. Today we are getting into our last topic of Unit 4 on life functions by discussing homeostasis. And we're going to figure out what that is, why it's important, and how you are able to maintain it. It's something that we've touched on a little bit before in past videos, but we're going to get into it a lot today, hence the title. So as I like to start these videos off, I have a couple questions for you first that you'll hopefully know the answer to by the end of the video. The first one is what happens when you drink 3.5 liters of Mountain Dew. That's a lot of Mountain Dew. And I'm asking you the age-old question that I way too often get while we're doing labs with a variety of liquids that should not be ingested. What happens if I drink this? So, what happens if you drink 3.5 liters of Mountain Dew? Let's find out. What happens when you get cold? And why do things change when you get cold? And what happens when you get a cold? What happens when you get sick? Okay, and what does that have to do with homeostasis? So we're going to come back to those later at the end of the video. And the last question I have for you is, how is your body like a thermostat? Because it is, just tell me, how is it like a thermostat? Okay, so let's take a look at this protocell here and discuss its homeostasis. This is something that we brought up in a couple of our last videos. If you haven't been watching the videos, then you might not know what I'm talking about. But the protocell is the model of what we think the very first organism looked like on planet Earth. And it's just essentially a phospholipid bilayer bubble with some self-replicating RNA inside of it. But it was qualified as a living thing because it met all the requirements for us to consider it a living thing. The inside of the membrane was different from the outside of the membrane, allowing it to metabolize and replicate its RNA. So this membrane that it has here was just protective and stable enough to keep the internal environment separate from the external environment, so what's going on inside of the membrane can carry on and it can do its normal life functions without too much changing in the outside environment. So this bullet point here says the ability to maintain a stable internal environment at the cellular level is crucial to being alive. Okay, so even though things are changing all the time in the external environment, outside of your body, outside of a cell even, the internal environment needs to stay stable, and that process of being able to maintain that internal environment is called homeostasis, the regulation and maintenance of the internal environment within the narrow ranges that are necessary to support life at the cellular level despite changes in the external environment. Okay, so homeostasis is like a balancing act, right? If I balance my meter stick here, okay, I'm going to find the middle and I'm balancing the meter stick. Okay, look, if it tilts to the left, what am I going to do? I'm going to shift it back to the right. And if it shifts back to the right, what am I going to do? I'm going to tilt it back to the left. Okay, this is kind of like homeostasis. All right, if your internal and external environment need to be balanced, okay, then your body needs to work hard to counteract changes. I have a fly on this thing. Counteract changes in the internal environment. So if something changes, body needs to be able to shift it back to normal. Okay, so and that's only a very narrow range that living things are supposed to be stable at. For example, you think of your body temperature, it's supposed to stay 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. If you get too cold, you got to warm back up. If you get too hot, you got to cool back down just so you're in that narrow temperature range. Okay, and your body's ability to maintain that is called homeostasis. Every cause of death is a complete irreversible loss of homeostasis. So it doesn't matter if you get hit by a bus or if you die of some disease, every cause of death is a complete irreversible loss of homeostasis, meaning that your body is not able to bring itself back to normal after some kind of internal change. Okay, so here's a very simple flow chart showing what homeostasis is all about. Okay, whether there's an internal change or an external change, if there's a change in homeostasis, okay, if it fails to bring you back to homeostasis, it's illness. But if it does bring you back to homeostasis, it's called wellness. All right, or being healthy. Okay, so that's what homeostasis is all about. And organisms maintain homeostasis through feedback loops, an interaction between a receptor, a control center, and an effector to return a factor in the internal environment to a set point. Okay, so here's our first question. What might happen if your body doesn't maintain an internal body temperature? You're going to end up looking like Jack Nicholson here in The Shining. you're gonna not be okay. This guy is clearly not maintaining homeostasis here, and he's not well. Okay, so through feedback loops, what your body does is respond to changes and try to reverse the change or amplify a change depending on what the goal is for your body. Okay, so here's a negative feedback loop, for example. A stimulus is a change that happens in the internal and external environment. It's picked up by a sensor. It sends a message to an evaluator or a control center, and then that control center sends a message to the effector. Okay? And the effector is a part of your body that works to stop the stimulus. Okay? We're going to walk through an example here in just a second. Okay? So this first term that I just introduced to you is stimulus. A feedback loop begins with the stimulus. Anything from the internal or external environment that causes an imbalance in internal conditions. Okay, so we're going to walk through what a feedback loop looks like in the context of one example. Okay, so let's just say you're outside on a cold day and your body temperature drops. It hasn't been cold around here recently, but let's just pretend it's cold outside. And what's going to happen when you are cold? Well, your body temperature drops. That is a stimulus. Your stimulus, that act of your body temperature dropping, is picked up by receptors. Receptors detect information about changes in an organism's internal environment. Okay, so here's some receptors in your skin. Specialized nervous tissue in the skin detects changes in temperature. Okay, so they're going to be able to pick up this message that, hey, body temperature is dropping. We're getting cold. What's happening here? Okay, so what they're going to do, okay, the receptor is going to pick up that message from the stimulus and be like, hey, it's cold. This is when your body kind of realizes it's cold. So the stimulus is the temperature dropping. The receptor is picking up that message. Okay? Then what do receptors do? Well, they send information to a control center, also known as the evaluator, which compares that information, that stimulus that it picked up, to a set point. What should our temperature be at? What should our blood pH or blood glucose be at? Okay? That's what the control center decides. And very often the control center in your body is the brain, or a part of the brain, or the spinal cord. Okay, so set points are values for ideal body conditions. So, like again, 96 to 98 degrees Fahrenheit for body temperature. It's about 37 degrees Celsius for body temperature. Okay, but control centers, as I said down here, are usually in the brain and the spinal cord. So the receptors in the skin are going to send a message, send a electric message through nerves to the brain, and the brain's going to say, hey, wait a second. Is the temperature lower than the set point? They have to compare, okay, how, the temperature drop, that's our stimulus. Is it too cold? Is it bringing us below our set point? And if it does bring it below the set point, then we have to send a message to the effectors, which is our third components of control in a feedback loop here. The control center says, okay, is it too cold for our set point? If it is, then it sends a message to the effectors, and those are organs that carry out a response to return conditions to the set point. So the effectors are what cause the effect. Okay, the receptors are the cause, the effectors are the effect, kind of. Okay, so a couple things that your body's going to do in response to a change in body temperature. You're going to start to shiver. When muscles contract, it uses up a lot of ATP and generates a lot of heat. So that's going to start trying to bring your body temperature back up. Goosebumps are going to occur. It's not very effective. It's vestigial. But goosebumps are going to try and trap heat on your skin. And in your skin and your extremities, your blood vessels are actually going to constrict a little bit. They're going to kind of narrow up so less blood goes to the external parts of your body and more blood is kept inside in order to try and keep you alive, okay, and keep the inside of your body warm, because that's where the really important stuff is. So yeah, it's going to do a couple of those things in order to try and bring our body temperature back to normal. So back to our schematic here. If the temperature is lower than the set point, then if the control center says, no, we're good, it's not too low, okay, you're still at homeostasis. But if it is, okay, the control center sends a message to the effector and says, yeah, do something about it. And, well, what the effector does, the effector produces the response. And the response that we were just talking about here, if your body temperature gets too cold, or you get shivers, you get goosebumps, and you get vasoconstriction, those constriction of those blood vessels to try and maintain heat. Okay? And this will happen again and again and again and again until we're back at the set point and we return to homeostasis. Okay, so this is a feedback loop over here, and this is how living things maintain homeostasis. But there's two different types of feedback loops. The one that we just walked through is an example of a negative feedback loop, where a stimulus causes an imbalance in one direction, and the response adjusts the body in the opposite direction. Right? So this is your typical feedback loop. If you get too cold, what's going to happen? Your body's going to warm you up. If you get too hot, well, body's going to cool you back down. Okay, so how are you like a thermostat? Well, you're exactly like a thermostat. If you think about it, the thermostat, it detects changes in temperature, and if it's too cold for what you set the thermostat to, it's going to kick on the heat. Or if it's, if it's colder, or excuse me, if it's too warm for the thermostat, the set point, the temperature that you set it at, well, it might kick on the AC and start blasting cold air all over the place so that it brings the temperature back down in the summer. Okay, so that you're kind of like a thermostat in that respect. Okay, because the thermostat is doing some negative feedback loops to maintain body temperature. Okay, a couple of other examples of negative feedback loops. Now think back to the Mountain Dew. Glucose concentrations in the blood, also known as your blood sugar, is regulated with a negative feedback loop by the pancreas. So the pancreas is a big old gland. It's behind your liver in your digestive system, and its job, one of its jobs, it has many jobs, is to release insulin, which causes cells to take in sugar from your blood when there's when you have too much blood sugar, when there's too much glucose in your blood. Okay? The opposite is when, okay, what if there's not enough glucose in your blood sugar is very low, well, then your pancreas is going to start to release a chemical called glucagon, which causes cells to release glucose when blood sugar is too low. Okay, so this is another example of a negative feedback loop. So your body says, okay, I drink 4 Mountain Dews or something like that, and my blood sugar goes way up. My pancreas is going to respond to that. Okay? I'm going to have receptors first pick up that stimulus, send a message to my brain, say like, oh, okay, hold on. Is it higher than normal? Is it higher than the set point? And if they say yes, then it's going to send a message to my pancreas to start releasing some insulin and bring my blood sugar back down. Okay, so this is a classic example of a negative feedback loop. One more that we're going to chat about, actually 2 more, is that carbon dioxide in your blood is regulated by the cardiovascular and respiratory systems, right? So if there's too much carbon dioxide, if, say, you're exercising, there's more carbon dioxide becoming a byproduct of cellular respiration, and it's kind of building up in your blood, well, then you're going to start breathing harder to get rid of more of that carbon dioxide and replace it with oxygen, okay? Blood delivers oxygen to cells and CO2, carbon dioxide, to the lungs to get rid of. Okay, so this is a perfect example, again, of a negative feedback loop. You need more energy, you start producing more carbon dioxide because of some exercise, and your body's going to bring that carbon dioxide back down by increasing your breathing rate. Okay, another negative feedback loop. And finally, here's one last one that we're going to find in animals. Particularly fish. The urinary system controls the amount of water and waste found in the blood. Hey, you can't have too much water, you can't have too much waste in your blood. Okay, so your urinary system, particularly your kidneys, are going to be responsible for something called osmoregulation. And those are going to be controlling how much water and how much waste is in your blood. If there's too much water, it takes actions to reduce the amount of water. If there's too much waste, it takes actions to reduce the amount of waste and bring it back to a normal set point. And this is also happens differently in freshwater and saltwater fish. Osmoregulation is really, really important because when you're a saltwater fish, you're not only taking in water, but you're also taking in salt. But if you're a freshwater fish, it's only water. So this is going to be very important for fish, and that's why a freshwater fish can't survive in saltwater, and a saltwater fish can't survive in freshwater. Kidneys also regulate blood pressure. Okay, so if your blood pressure gets too high, your kidneys are going to bring it back down. If blood pressure gets too low, kidneys are going to bring it back up. All right, so the other type of feedback loop before we end this video here is a positive feedback loop. A positive feedback loop makes adjustments in the same direction as the stimulus, reinforcing instead of counteracting the stimulus. It's also known as a vicious cycle. So why in the heck would we ever want to amplify a change or make an environmental stimulus worse? Well, it's used when a rapid change is needed to complete a task. For example, if you're bleeding, okay, you're losing blood, and what's your body going to try to do? Well, it's going to try to stop the bleeding. Okay? So a positive feedback loop from blood clotting is when blood cells called platelets form a clot where the blood vessel is torn. Okay, so you have a torn blood vessel. You're releasing blood. It's nasty. What's going to happen? Well, platelets come to the site, and what do platelets do? Well, they clot together and they try to form, well, a clot. Okay, to plug up the hole and prevent more blood from being lost. After they clot, platelets release a signal to other platelets to tell them, hey, we need help over here. Come form a clot with us. Okay, so then more platelets arrive to the cut and begin to clot. Okay, and what do they do in response? Well, they send more messages to more platelets to clot. Okay, and that cycle repeats again and again and again and again and again if you're still bleeding, and then the clot will stop the blood loss. Okay, so this is a positive feedback loop where one change causes more of the same change. Another example is through childbirth. Okay, so if you're about to have a baby, well, the baby starts to push, and it starts to apply pressure to the cervix and to the walls of the uterus. So nerve impulses from the cervix are transmitted to the brain. The brain stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete a chemical called oxytocin. And oxytocin, well, that's going to it's going to stimulate more contractions and push the baby towards the cervix. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, the baby's going to apply more pressure to the uterine wall and the cervix and start this process all over again. Okay, so the baby pushes a little bit, body releases oxytocin. And the oxytocin allows the uterus to open up a little bit and the cervix to open up a little bit, which allows the baby to apply more pressure, and the process repeats. It's a vicious cycle. Okay? One change causes more of the initial change. All right? So hopefully we've figured out the answers to each of these questions so far with regards to homeostasis. But if you drink a lot of Mountain Dew, your pancreas is going to release a lot of insulin to try and store the sugar that you just took in, so your blood glucose drops. Okay? It will likely store it as fatty acids. If you drink too much soda, that's not good for you. It's really, really not good for you. Okay? But yeah, it's going to try to bring the blood sugar back down. Hey, when you have a cold, if you get a fever, well, that's a result of a positive feedback loop. Your body raises its own temperature to try and destroy the invader, which is a virus in this case. If you have the flu or the cold, and it's moving away from homeostasis, it tries to amplify a change. Okay, your body temperature tries to amplify up and up and up in order to try and complete a task or to make one rapid change, which is destroying that virus. All right, that is it for Unit 4. Please let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you next time.